You on here? It's Friday afternoon. Looking forward to the weekend myself. How about you? Got any plans this weekend?
I'm really looking forward to this weekend. Yeah,
Yeah,
going to be getting out and about, going for some nice walks. Hopefully it'll stay sunny.
good,
That'll be
good.
nice.
I've got the lovely old football with the children to do
Oh,
again.
excellent. Good times.
So anyway, hi, thank you for joining us. My name's Neil. I'm a wellbeing coach here at Isseropia, and today with me here is Naomi.
Hello.
So we're today going to be talking about the importance of regulating our emotions. It can be very, very difficult, especially when we have not had any kind of insight of how emotions can create kind of different behaviors within ourselves. Some of us find it difficult to actually, first of all, understand what an emotion is trying to tell us. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But just to give you an overview, this is a live broadcast. So by all means, please contribute as much as you can. You've got the facility there to drop us a line or put some questions up, and Naomi and myself will hopefully keep on top of that and try and answer a few questions for you. So what is Isseropia all about? We're a very person-centered organization. So we understand that people suffer with mental health issues, and lots of people have different mental health concerns and issues. And one of the key things around that is emotional regulation, which is why today we're going to be talking about that. So we're just coaches. We're not therapists, and I don't certainly myself have any kind of medical training. We come from the side of lived experience. So a lot of things that we help people with are things that, like myself and Naomi, have suffered with ourselves, and we've managed to enable ourselves, empower ourselves to use some ways of coping with life a little bit differently, which has brought us a sense of more of a well-being for ourselves. So if you post anything, it's just a gentle reminder that that will be seen across the board. So if there's something that you'd like to post but you feel uncomfortable in doing so, then by all means either just pick up the phone to us at some stage or don't post. Okay, so we've already kind of put a selection of questions together, and then Naomi and I will have a discussion about some things that have happened to us and how we've managed to kind of regulate our emotions more effectively from when I was poorly effectively. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about some situations where we have found ourselves using some of the tips and the tools that we promote to actually manage that far better, because emotional regulation is a really important thing. So the first question that we kind of discussed beforehand was, why is emotional regulation so important? So what was your kind of feel on that one?
Yeah, I think emotional regulation is like the core part of getting well, really. I think especially when you're really, really low and struggling, um, it's huge. So it's massive. It's like the core basically of getting better is managing those emotions and trying to manage them in a way where it's healthy instead of unhealthy. I mean, I don't know about you, but I used a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms when I was really unwell in order to manage my emotions. And it took me a long time to be able to figure out what tools to use that were going to be healthy for me to be able to manage my emotions. I used a lot of self-harm sometimes and alcohol to be able to manage my emotions. But inevitably, in the long run, it was much more difficult for me to manage my emotions. It didn't help. Might have helped maybe like in the moment slightly, but long term, it was really, really damaging on my mental health. So regulating our emotions in a healthy way, I feel like that's like paramount in being able to get better and to get well. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, I did very much the same. And one thing that I learned that I'd like to share with you is, initially when I was not very well, I didn't even know what my emotions were.
Exactly.
I've now learned that emotions are telling us a story, and those stories are really based around your body is telling you that you need to take action. Something is wrong, which creates emotions, and that could lead you back to something might have connected with you. It's created an emotion that's made you sad or whatever. So one of the key things that I started to learn was, first of all, recognize my emotion and my body, what was happening to my body. When I got emotional in certain situations, for instance, I used to get sad. I had telltale signs that I wasn't aware of at the time. My body would tell me something.
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
this links very much, doesn't it, Naomi, into your body goes into kind of emotion that's trying to tell you something and is trying to protect you in some way.
Definitely.
What I found, first of all, that helped me without a doubt is I was feeling an emotion and I couldn't kind of identify what it was trying to tell me initially. We do a bit of work, don't we, when we go through our journeys, about the first fundamental thing is to recognize what that emotion is. And I'll give you a quick scenario of the ways that I kind of got my head around things. There's a lot of people talk about certain aspects of an emotion they might be feeling. A lot of people, I don't know if you have this experience yourself, talk to me about anxiety, for instance.
Definitely.
And I watch on the news quite regularly and like soap operas and stuff, and the word anxious comes up so many times.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, anxiety must be a thing. Now, anxiety is a thing, it's a true thing, but that's when if it's a prolonged thing, then it becomes kind of an anxiety. A lot of the situations that I hear myself when I hear these things is not really anxiety. It's just a fear of the unknown, isn't it?
Definitely.
And that's, go on, carry on. You were going to say something there.
Yeah, a lot of it is it's like biological. So we're supposed to feel anxiety. If a lion was to walk in the room and we didn't feel any anxiety, that's going to be a bit of a problem, you know. So it's biological. We're supposed to feel anxiety. We're supposed to feel all these emotions. We're human beings. We're supposed to feel these things. But it's when those emotions are massively irregulated and really damaging and really affecting our lives, and we feel like we're not able to manage those emotions, that's when we start to struggle. That's when it becomes a problem. And especially if we're not able to manage them in a healthy way, that's when it can really escalate. So it's we're supposed to have anxiety, we're supposed to have sadness, we're supposed to have, like, you know, all of these emotions. It's important that we have them. We can never get rid of those emotions.
Yes.
We never get rid of anxiety, but we can manage them. We can manage that. And it's sort of like, yeah, I think we're hoping to go through a few ways of how we can do that this afternoon in this half an hour.
And I think Naomi's absolutely correct. A lot of our mental health issues can stem from poor emotional regulation. Massively. Because, you know, a mood is a very much a temporary thing. It's how we quickly we can process that and how we can actually take steps that are healthy as opposed to unhealthy. In my situation, like you've shared a little bit about yours, the only way that I could cope with my emotions at that point in time, I took unhealthy coping mechanisms. And I found myself being, you know, addicted to drink, for instance. But there's lots of other people that are addicted to lots of situations based on an emotion that they might be feeling. And I get another key thing, especially around anxiety, is things like isolation. That's an unhealthy coping mechanism in terms of you. Not only do you isolate, it takes away the pain and the suffering. I completely understand that. But there's so much more that you miss out on as a direct result of that.
I think the problem is when you're unwell and those emotions aren't regulated and you're using those unhealthy coping mechanisms so much that your comfort zone just gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it just becomes sometimes just your room, and just like, and you don't want to talk to anybody. You become so isolated, and it's effectively really damaging. So it's so important to be able to regulate our emotions in a healthy way so that we're able to have like our best lives, like, you know, as best as we can do, and be as well as we possibly can be. That's massive.
I just seen a note there from Sylvia. Hiya, Sylvia, good to see you again. She says, yes, I am the same, Neil. My body is trying to tell me something. I don't know what. Anxiety is with me all of the time. And again, you know, from people like yourselves, Sylvia, that's one key learning that I kind of found when I was coming through my journey is, first of all, you need to identify what that emotion is. And emotions are quite healthy in terms of, if you can process them effectively, you can start making plans as opposed to kind of suppressing them and not being able to cope with them very well. So it's a really good point. I'm just going to go on to the next question. Why is emotional regulation so important? We've just done that. So what does poor emotion regulation look like? Well, again, I think we've kind of touched on that in a lot of aspects, have we not? If you can't regulate your emotion quickly and effectively, it can actually inflate that feeling and that thought. And one of the key things, again, that I learned is the power of interpretation and how our thoughts can start to kick in. Did you find that?
I think with anxiety especially, I think I found that a lot. And it was like, if I focused on something, the more I focused on it, the bigger it became. So what you focus on expands. So the more you focus on what's making me anxious, the more I think about it, the more I sort of like get myself worked up about it and think around it. And the bigger and the worse I became, and the more panicked I became. And I used to suffer from panic attacks as well because of that anxiety. But just figuring out that actually what you focus on expands, and trying to think of something positive and try and distract yourself. That really helped me. Distraction was a big part of me reducing my anxiety in a lot of situations, and also turning anxiety, which can be unhealthy, into concern, which is something we talk about in the anxiety workshop. And I can give a good example for that. So say like I was to go to a job interview and I was feeling a lot of anxiety and feeling really overwhelmed. I probably wouldn't go to the interview in the end. I'd probably just feel like, no, it's not going to work. I won't go. I feel too anxious. They're not going to like me. I'm not going to enjoy it in any way, shape or form. I'm definitely not going to get the job either, because my anxiety would just be too high. But if I changed it to concern, changing that anxiety to concern would look like me possibly planning out what I was going to wear, having it laid out, and having that, and maybe doing a little bit of research about the company that I was going to go to, having some bullet point notes down of what I wanted to ask or what I wanted to say, and sort of preparing myself for it. So turning that anxiety into planning, turning that anxiety into a concern would really, really help me to reduce my anxiety around that situation. I think a lot of other people find that quite helpful, but then sometimes it can go quite over the top of planning, and you can be like so structured with a lot of things because of that anxiety that it then becomes, if anything comes out of that plan or goes slightly wrong, then it causes you massive amounts of anxiety. So I think there's like a healthy balance between planning and sort of getting that healthy balance right to reduce that anxiety.
That's actually it in a nutshell. You know, when we kind of talk to ourselves, because a lot of this is about how we talk to ourselves and how we can kind of frame it. You know, I always pick up the scenario about how Isopropia evolved. And quite often when we talk to some of our members and say, we mention the word angry, and everybody or a lot of people think that anger is unhealthy. But anger can be quite healthy. Going back to what Naomi's saying there, if you use it and use it properly, anger you could use healthily. And Isopropia evolved as a direct result of that. We had our CEOs that worked in mental health organizations across the, and then they became very, very frustrated. If they'd have actually got angry and used that the opposite way, there's a strong possibility that those individuals were probably left the NHS. But what they did is they focused their energies in a healthy manner and started to make plans, and found that there was something missing, and Isopropia evolved as a direct result of that.
Of anger. Used in a healthy way to help people. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
So I think one of the guys is replying to Sylvia there. So we're going to go on to the next question. Which is the next question. How does emotional regulation, should we put that one up?
Yeah.
How does emotional regulation link to resilience? Now, that's an interesting one, isn't it? We always, I use this phrase quite a bit, is sometimes we need to take kind of different pathways. So when we're emotionally charged, for instance, we've got to understand that it's okay to feel like that. You've got to start thinking, if you're emotionally charged, how you get away from that as quickly as you possibly can in a healthy manner. Yeah. So I often say things like, you've got to start getting comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. And that's really recognizing that that emotion is trying to tell you something. And when you start getting comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, it becomes less scary, and it gets you more focused on how you can remove yourself and move yourself away from that in a more healthy, constructive manner. Does that make sense?
I think it's also important to say sometimes with a lot of feelings we can be so like trying to run away from them and trying to distract ourselves from them, from not feeling them, but sometimes actually it's quite healthy just to be able to feel them. I mean, especially with like, you know, sadness and sometimes anxiety as well, sometimes it's healthy to actually just sit with that feeling and just feel it for a little bit, because we can become so pinned on trying to run away from it or distract ourselves from what we're feeling that becomes unhealthy. It becomes, we're not able to regulate our emotions because we're not letting ourselves feel them. I think it's really important to be able to feel the emotion and then let it go. Don't become the emotion. Do you know what I mean? So don't actually become the emotion. Just feel that emotion and then let it go. And if we're not giving ourselves a space to feel that, we're constantly trying to distract ourselves, that can become unhealthy as well and toxic inevitably.
Absolutely. And I remember somebody telling me something, and it really did connect with me, is there's a lot of people that become anxious about being anxious. There's a lot of people that become a bit more depressed for being depressed. And it kind of creates a manifest, builds a snowball effect, doesn't it?
Definitely.
So in terms of like getting comfortable with it, I think once you recognize it, one, it becomes a little less scary, and then two, it's starting to make plans that are healthy to ourselves. And that in itself is really pushing ourselves away from some of the things that we use at the moment to kind of soften that emotional response that we get. We've talked a little bit about, you know, unhealthy coping mechanisms. When you start trying to put in healthy coping mechanisms, it might mean that you have to create a complete new pathway.
Definitely.
Especially with people that suffer with anxiety, for instance. It's almost pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. The comfort zone is important, but when, I think you used the phrase, it starts to shrink. So sometimes we've got to push ourselves out of our comfort zone. And the only way that I could ever get myself out of my comfort zone, because I certainly lived in a comfort zone for a period of time, was forward planning.
Definitely.
And I loved your scenario about the job perspective. You know, for instance, it can be very comfortable, and it kind of soothes that emotion very, very quickly by making a decision that doesn't actually benefit. Definitely. We use a tool at Isseropia that a lot of people use, and that's the Crossroads to Happiness. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
And that really kind of gets you to look at, if you're planning and pushing yourself out of the comfort zone, it's recognized that it's going to be uncomfortable, and you're ready and prepared for that. But then when you go through this Crossroads to Happiness, then invariably the best decision to make is the hardest one.
Definitely, but it's not always going to be that hard. So when you start, because something I've realized throughout my time in being unwell, especially when I was at my unwellness, that actually it's really hard to push yourself out of your comfort zone. It's actually so difficult because you haven't got any motivation at all. There's no motivation there in any way, shape, or form when you're feeling so unwell. So actually that want to get out of your comfort zone just isn't there. So what I had to do was kind of like become my own parent in a way and discipline myself and just go, you have to get out, go and do this. So I'd have to write down, like, at 1 o'clock, I'm going to go for a half an hour walk, and I will make myself get out there. And it's about pushing yourself, but it's not always going to be that difficult, because once you've done it a few times, once you've stepped out of that comfort zone and you've kind of got into that place where you're feeling you know, getting that sort of, actually, I felt loads better for going for a walk, you know, and that enjoyment and getting those endorphins flowing and everything will give you the motivation to want to do it again. So it will get easier. The more you step out of your comfort zone, the more you start doing those healthy things, the easier it will become to do that, and it won't be so difficult inevitably.
Oh, it's nice to see that we've got some comments coming through. Roland has just posted a comment. Anxiety keeps me housebound and from keeping appointments. Having bipolar does not help. I completely understand that, and I'm sure we both kind of connect with that kind of thing. This is where we're trying to kind of not so much educate you, but give you some indication of
some
tips and some tricks, because anxiety for yourself, Roland, keeps you housebound. Okay, so I'm sure that a lot of us feel that from time to time, but being housebound is not good for our long-term mental well-being, because once you're housebound, you're kind of creating other things like lack of connection,
definitely, massively.
lack of community, stuff like that. So you've got to kind of use a way of saying, okay, I'm feeling anxiety. First of all, I need to understand my body is saying you've got to do something a little bit different, because I'm sure people that are housebound don't really want to be housebound.
No, definitely not.
And it's a really good point that you said. Sometimes it's the motivation that's not there.
No, and it's scary, isn't it? It's scary because you come into that comfort zone. It's so comfortable in there. Whether it's anything else out of that becomes really scary, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety about leaving that comfort zone. But it does get easier when you start to do it. It is really hard though.
And that's another interesting one, isn't it, Sarah? Hi, Sarah. Good to see you again. I get panic attacks as well. That's a really kind of a natural thing for very highly anxious people, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
We just had another one come through. I'm just going to quickly see what that is. Now, obviously, I don't know if you guys are aware, we normally do an hour on this, but we've now reduced it to half an hour, because we obviously understand that people out there have their lives to live. So, and to try and do a whole hour when you're watching just us two guys is quite difficult. So we're just going to go on to a couple of things that we found of helpful benefit.
Yeah.
What was the most important thing that connected with you when you were coming through? Was there certain tools that you were kind of exposed to that you still use now?
I think for me massively was grounding, like just having that grounding especially when I was feeling really, really anxious. Grounding myself was something that I really felt really helped me to de-escalate myself. But a lot of people say count 4 things that you can feel, 4 things you can touch, 4 things you can, and I hate math. So counting when I'm really anxious is the last thing that I want to do. So what I used to do was just literally get myself in the moment. I put the kettle on, make a cup of tea, sit down with my cup of tea, hold it in my hand, feel the heat of the cup in my hand, feel the weight of my body in the chair, and just smell the tea, drink the tea, and just put some really calming music on as well, and just pay attention to my breath. And that would just really, really help me to just sort of just get out of my head and just get into the moment. I found that really, really helpful. So grounding, but in my own kind of way of doing it. So yeah. Whatever helps you, and everybody's different as well.
Absolutely agree.
It's important to remember that everybody's different. But it's also important, I think, to stay open-minded, because what also helped me was yoga. And I was sort of like, loads of people like, try yoga, and I was like, I'm not a yoga person, like I don't do yoga. But I tried it in lockdown, because I was bringing up 3 children in lockdown, and it was intense, so I had to do something to help me with my mental health. So I tried yoga, and it actually really, really helped me, and I found it a really helpful tool to help me with my mental health as well as physically. So it's important to stay open-minded with a lot of things as well. So that's
absolutely. Thank you for that. Sarah, yes, we can see your messages. Sorry, we were in debate or talking, should I say, but you've put there, the Crossroads to Happiness is a fantastic tool to get things in perspective and make healthy decisions. And I absolutely agree with that, Sarah, and many of my colleagues here will see that I use that on a regular basis, especially when I'm facing things that maybe I don't want to do, or I have a little bit of fear around it, or even making decisions whether they kind of would suit me or wouldn't suit me. Because short term, they might create an emotion of, let's just say, anger when something's changing, for instance. But then when you kind of start to sit down and have a bit of time and start to look at how the best reaction should be, then invariably I have changed my viewpoint on quite a few things in terms of stuff you've used in that kind of stuff. Another one that connected with me when I got introduced to it was the stop technique.
Yeah.
And there's just one part of that I kind of do on a regular basis now, is the T, which is just take a break.
Yeah, just take a break, definitely.
Quite often now I can kind of sense something going on in my body because I've learned about what my body is trying to tell me. And I've also learned that if you respond based on that emotion, invariably you're probably going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
So I now use that quite regularly. If I feel, especially when I'm moving towards frustration or something like that, I go stop and I just come away from it and I just take 5 minutes.
So what happens with, I'm similar, but with me, I get quite sort of, my patience gets short, and I get I'll feel myself getting really sort of angry and frustrated. And a lot of the time when I get really, really, really angry, it gets to the point where I start crying, and I'll start crying like, right, so actually I'm not angry, I'm actually sad. And then I can try and figure out, why am I sad? And I start thinking about that and try and figure it out for myself. Anger tends to be like quite a big mask for a lot of other emotions.
Absolutely.
And it tends to be one of the ones that a lot of people struggle with the most, because it tends to be like, think of an iceberg, like the top of the iceberg above the water is anger, underneath the water is the rest of the iceberg, and a lot of it's just like sadness and fear and anxiety and, you know, things that have triggered us. But anger tends to be the one that we go to the most. But once that's happened for me, it's usually about 10 minutes after I've sort of got really angry, that I'll cry and then start thinking about why I'm upset, and then figure out what's going on. It just takes it. So it's helpful, and that technique is going to help you to figure that out. Stop technique is really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when I was going through my journey, if somebody just said to me, take a break, I didn't think that was absolutely, I thought that was impossible, because a lot of the times I found myself reacting to the emotion. But when you actually take a break away from it, it gives you time to respond correctly. And there's been a few times when I've felt angry, I've taken 5 minutes out and I'm a completely different person afterwards. Really, I kind of see other people's viewpoints. I can kind of look at it on a bigger perspective. And that was another element. I remember somebody saying, take a helicopter view, remove yourself from something and look at the overall picture.
It's helpful.
So we're kind of coming towards the end here. So I hope you found that quick discussion a little bit of beneficial. There's a number of things that you can do. I would certainly say jump on our website. We've got quite a lot of tools and tips and tricks on issaropia.uk. Don't forget, if you need any support outside of this, then there is the line here. You can always phone our duty. There's also the crisis line. And I'm hoping that that's benefited you in some way. So I'm going to leave it there and wish you all a very happy weekend. I'm certainly going to go away and do a little bit of, do you know, I might even get a game of golf in this weekend.
Good idea, I like it.
If my kids allow me to, because they've got lots of other things.
I've only ever played crazy golf.
Oh, well, we'll need to go out and have a game of golf sometime. I'll teach you how not to play.
Excellent, like it.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time we're here.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye.